Hello and welcome back to Pastor Chats. My name is John, the pastor at Faith Presbyterian Church in McDonough, Georgia, and welcome back to our second part of our attempt to write a sermon without the robot's help. That's right, no AI for this sermon. Last time we talked about choosing a passage and all the difficulties that go into that. And then we chose a passage. We chose John chapter 14, verses 1 through 6 for our sermon passage. And now today we're going to talk about the integral next step. You cannot skip this, and that is reading the text. Now you might say, John, this is silly. Why make a video about reading the text? Of course you've got to read the text. Well, consider the fact that there are pastors out there going into ChatGPT or whatever and saying, John chapter 14, verses 1 through 6, give me 3 points, give me some illustrations, let's go. That's horrible. We need to read the text. We got to actually take the time. And there is some thought that needs to go into this. We need to read the text, expose ourselves to the Word of God, to the text, so that we understand the context. We understand who is speaking, who they're speaking to. What's the history going on here? What's the setting? We need to understand what just happened before, what just happened after. We need to pay attention to the verbs. We need to pay attention to conjunctions. We need to pay attention to participles, words ending in ing, all that kind of stuff. We got to focus in on the text so we can really understand it. And this is the step that I take before I get into actually looking at the original language. I want to understand it in the English as best as I can, then look at the original language to reinforce and help me understand what is the actual outline here, what is going on, and then we get into all the other stuff, okay? So let's do it. Here is our passage over here on the right. By the way, if you're wondering what this is Logos Bible software that I use. I've had it for I don't know how long. As part of my seminary education with Knox Seminary, for my tuition, I actually had to buy even more Logos Bible software. I was not unhappy with that because, to be honest with you, it's really good stuff. What it is, it's basically a giant database program. There's like 4,000 volumes of books on here. I don't read all 4,000, but what it does is it allows you with quick searches to get to information in those books really, really quickly. Now I should point out, I don't have the newest version of Logos. The newest version of Logos apparently does use AI. Now, I don't know to what extent. I don't think they have like a button you can press and make a sermon. I hope not. Logos, if you do, stop it. Get rid of that, okay? All right, but back to our passage. Over here on the right is the ESV. On the left, I put things that I can link up with this. So over on the left is the NASB that we'll also be reading. And as I scroll, they scroll together. And I can do that with other things like in our next video, we'll look at the Greek. And so here's the Greek interlinear. And as I scroll, it goes through the Greek as well. So just to give you a little heads up there. So let's read over here on the right. Here's our passage, John chapter 14, starting at verse 1. This is Jesus speaking, obviously, words in red. And what am I looking for? I'm looking for things that stand out. Again, who's speaking, who they're speaking to. I'm looking for things that feel odd or weird, questions that I have. And as I'm reading, I'm also trying to get in my head like kind of an outline, make sure I understand exactly what's being said, why it's being said. Here we go. Verse 1, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. So Jesus is being comforting right here from the beginning. He's trying to comfort the disciples. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? Right away, my little sensors go off. That's an awkward sentence. That feels like an awkward sentence. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? I'm going to be curious to look at other translations of that, okay? Because that feels like an awkward sentence. Verse 3, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. Okay, so we're getting a bit of an outline here. Jesus is trying to comfort the disciples. He's talking about having faith, and then faith in what? Faith in what he's doing. What he's doing is he's going to go prepare a place for the disciples. All right. But not only that, in verse 3, he's going to come back. So he's talking about his ascension, and then he's talking about his return, his future return, where he will take the disciples back to himself so they can be where he is. All right. Verse 4, and you know the way to where I am going, which prompts a question from Thomas. Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way? Jesus said to him, and here's our big famous verse, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And there you go. So I might read that in the ESV a few times, try to wrap my head around some things. Again, try to get a little bit of an outline. Then I'm going to read it in another English translation. Why? I want to compare and contrast. I want to see how the translators translate different things so that I can get a better understanding about what's actually being said. And that preps me for when I get to the Greek for things to look out for. There are two other English translations that I always read every single week. The first is the New American Standard Bible, and then the second is the NET, the New English Translation. Now, why those two? There's other great translations out there. King James is fine. New King James is fine. CSB is pretty good. The 1984 NIV is great. All those are fine, okay? But why do I choose those two? The ESV is what I preach from. It's what's in our pews, right? And that tends to be a pretty word-for-word translation from the original language. It tries as much as it can to be a word-for-word translation. Now, the New American Standard Bible is also a word-for-word translation, but the New American Standard Bible is even more so. It's even more strict about being a word-for-word. So much so that sometimes the New American Standard is a little stiff. It's a little hard to read in some places in the English because it's so word for word. But because those two are trying to be equivocal in that way, when I see a difference there, that clues me in. Oh, this is something important. This is something I really need to pay attention to in the Greek. Then there's the New English Translation. Why do I choose that one? I don't actually care for the translation of the New English Translation all that much. I think a lot of times it's not what I would translate to. But here's what makes the New English Translation invaluable. Let me actually show it to you real quick. The New English Translation has translator and manuscript notes. It has thousands upon thousands upon thousands of translator notes. Just here in our passage, in verses 1 through 6, there are 14. You see these little blue numbers? There are 14 different translator notes. And some of these, like verse 11 here, this is a note about the actual manuscripts, the original manuscripts that we have. And then let's see, up here in verse 2, here's a thing about the word believe, pistio. All of those are huge helps for me when I'm first reading the text to go, okay, these are things when I get into the Greek, these are things that are going to help me to be able to understand better. And by the way, you can for free, you don't need Logos, you can for free go online. I think it's like net.org or something like that. And you can read the Net Bible, the Net translation for free and read all of those Greek notes and translator notes for yourself. I really recommend doing that. Okay, we've read it in the ESV. Now let's go to the NASB. Let's compare a little bit. All right, starting at verse 1. Do not let your heart be troubled. There's a difference. In the ESV, it has it as plural, hearts, and in the New American Standard has heart. That's interesting. Why? Don't know yet. We'll find out. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. Okay, not rooms, different word there. Make a note. All right, different word there. If it were not so, I would have told you, for I go to prepare a place for you. Okay. All right. So, it looks to me, so this is not a question in the NASB. And in the ESV, they have Jesus saying this as a question. In the NASB, they have Jesus saying this as a statement. And it looks like the difference might be this conjunction for, hoti in the Greek. And I wonder in the ESV if they even have that translation. They're making it that. Ooh, interesting. Okay, this is why you pay attention to conjunctions. Conjunctions are important. Conjunction, junction, what's your function? Sorry, kids of the 90s. Okay, verse 3. Let's go down to verse 3. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself. In the ESV, we've got take you to myself, and here we have receive. That's going to be probably the Greek word lambano, I'm guessing. Yeah. But we'll like I said, it's prompting me. It's like, okay, be aware of this, that where I am, there you may be also. Verse 4, and you know the way where I am going. It's about the same. Verse 5, Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you're going. How do we know the way? About the same. Verse 6, Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. Okay, so about the same. So the first half of that passage in the NASB and the ESV have some maybe significant differences. So when I get to the original language, that's prompting me to look for those things. Then I'll read it again in the NET, paying attention to these different translator notes. Here's a thing about father's house and dwelling place versus room. See, that's why I like the NET. It gives me a heads up on those things. All right, so after I read the passage in the English several times and try to get my head around it, I'm going to jot down my notes. I'm going to begin to do my notes, and I'll show you a kind of an example here of my notes and what I do. So what I do is I just use a document, and I take every verse and I write it in bold with lots of space in between so that I can begin to make my notes. Okay. And I'll already start highlighting things like believe in God. There's a question there about the verb pistuo. I saw that in the NET. We'll talk about that in our next video. And then in my father's house are many rooms. In the NASB, we had dwelling place versus rooms. Is there a difference? What does that mean? Again, we'll talk about that some more in the next video when we actually get into the Greek. Then I even highlighted the question mark, because in the ESV it's a question, and the NASB it's a statement. Why is it that way? And then we had a note here about place. We also noted that there's a hina clause. Again, we'll get into that next video because that's more in the Greek stuff. But here, I'm just trying to get some things down. The next thing I'm going to do is context. I'm going to read the chapter before and the rest of the chapter. I'm going to read the context that our passage is in. And so I won't bore you with reading all of that in front of you right now. You can go read it on your own, but I'll share with you my notes from having read the context. So chapter 14, verses 1 through 6, where is this happening? This is the Last Supper. Actually, it's right after the Last Supper. In chapter 13, verses 30 and 31, it talks about Jesus and the disciples having left the upper room. Then Jesus begins this discourse of encouragement right after the Last Supper. In verses 1 through 20 of chapter 13, Jesus had already washed the disciples' feet. Verses 21 through 30, he announced that one of them would betray him. He even handed a piece of bread to Judas and said, this is the guy. And the disciples didn't understand that exactly. Verses 31 through 35, he instituted what's called the mandatum novum. That's the new commandment to love as Jesus has loved. And then during that commandment, there was something kind of interesting. He told the disciples that where he was going, they could not come. And this was actually, in fact, he even said, just as I told the Jews, this is actually something Jesus said earlier in the Gospel of John. Again, context, in chapter 7, verse 34, and chapter 8, verse 23, he had told the Jews, because of their sin, because of their unbelief, they could not go where he was going. You would think talking about heaven, right? Or the way of the cross and on to heaven, right? They could not go where he is going. So Peter, during this discourse after supper, during and after supper, he catches on to this and he says, Lord, where are you going? You know, like it's like he's cluing in, like, you've been talking to the Jews and to many other people about this place you're going. Where are you going? And then Jesus assures him, verse 36, he says, where I am going, you cannot follow me now. And he says this to Peter, but you will follow afterward. Now that led me down a little bit of a rabbit trail thinking, okay, where is Peter going afterward? Well, even in John's gospel, at the end of John's gospel, Jesus tells Peter, remember on the beach and everything, he tells Peter, hey, one day you're going to go somewhere you don't want to go. And he's talking about the manner in which Peter would die. Remember, Peter was going to be crucified. Historically, maybe even upside down, Peter was crucified. And so it could be that Jesus is personally saying to Peter, hey, Peter, where I'm going right now, I'm going to the cross, man. You can't go there, but you will follow me one day afterward. But I think it could also be broader than that. I think also Jesus could be saying to the disciples as a whole, guys, I'm going to the cross. I'm going the way of the cross and then on to heaven. And you can't go right now, but you will. This is unlike the message to the Jews. You're never going there, right? Because of your sin and unbelief, you're not going where I'm going. But to the disciples who believe in him, who have faith in him, you are going to go there one day. You will follow me afterward. And interestingly, it's not just Peter, of course, that follows the way of a martyr, but most of the disciples do, right? And then if you read after our passage, if you read the context after our passage, there's more encouraging things that Jesus says. At the end of chapter 14, the end of that whole section, Jesus kind of bookends what he is saying here. He started everything off in verse 1 by saying, let not your hearts be troubled. In the end, in verse 27, he bookends that by saying again, let not your hearts be troubled. And then he tells them, listen, all that I've been talking about with you, all this encouraging stuff I've been saying to you, this should cause you to rejoice. Why? He says, because I am going to the Father. And then he tells them, here's the reason I've said all this to you. The whole discourse, starting with our passage, the first 6 verses in chapter 14, this whole discourse, he says at the end of chapter 14, I've told you all this so that at the time of my departure, you will have faith when you see this happening. So he's telling them this so that as they're seeing him go to the cross, ascend into heaven, that they are not faithless, but they have faith. Again, going right back to what he said in verse 1, believe in God, believe also in me. So there's the context of what's going on. And so then I kind of made this little observation here. This entire section is meant by Jesus to be a message of reassurance and comfort. After giving such difficult news, he's talked about his coming death, the fact that one of them will betray him, the fact that he's talked about the difficult commandment to love like he loves, the mandatum novum. He's made a prediction of Peter's denial, right? And he especially has talked about the news of his departure, which he has been talking about for much of the Gospel of John. And so our passage is him beginning to comfort the disciples after giving them all of this difficult news. Okay, now I've got my head around this passage. I know what's going on. I know the context. I know who's speaking. I'm prepared for some of the language things that might be coming up. And so now in our next video, we'll get into the Greek. We'll get into the Greek a little bit and talk about the language, talk about some of the difficulties of reading things in Greek and Hebrew, and and whether or not, you should if you haven't studied it. And we'll get into that. But hey, thank you so much for joining me. Again, want to invite you to church, faithmcdonough.com. You're not doing anything this Sunday, come worship with us, okay? 10:30 a.m. We would love to see you. But hey, I hope this was encouraging for you. I hope it made you think. Come for our next video. We're going to get this sermon done without AI. All right. God bless. Talk to you later.